For many Russian soldiers, the order to attack Pokrovsk has become synonymous with a death sentence. Soldiers whisper among themselves that entering Pokrovsk means certain annihilation by Ukrainian artillery and drones, as videos from the area reveal the growing panic within the Russian ranks. In one, an agitated officer films two soldiers who refuse to go into the town, both saying they prefer prison over suicide missions. The battle for the town has slowly become a lethal war of shadows, with almost no chance of survival. The Russian army is disintegrating under the weight of its own losses, and its push to capture Pokrovsk turns into a slow-motion collapse of morale and unit-level desertions. Such scenes are no longer rare, as the Russian army's losses in the sector are so extreme that many contract soldiers who once enlisted for bonuses now see imprisonment or even death in custody as preferable to the slaughter awaiting them on the front. But these men will not be sent back to Russia to serve prison terms, as the Russian command sacrifices such penal battalions as cannon fodder and bait to reveal Ukrainian fire positions. One claims a medical condition, the other shows a wound, but the officer is unmoved. He records them as proof to strip them of their pay, while threatening that they will be transferred to a penal unit and ultimately will be pushed into Pokrovsk at gunpoint anyway. The Ukrainians counter them with their own ghostly patrols, reconnaissance teams that move in pairs or trios, each guided by a drone in the sky with thermal vision, while the soldiers themselves carry portable electronic warfare devices. These patrols are silent, highly mobile, and lethal, despite engagements that rarely involve more than a handful of soldiers on each side. One street, one courtyard, or one collapsed apartment block may become a self-contained battlefield for hours. This war of shadows is a direct consequence of the omnipresence of surveillance and FPV drones, as any concentration of troops or vehicle movement is immediately detected and destroyed. Inside Pokrovsk itself, the battle has evolved into a war of shadows, with the mass assaults of the first 2 years of the Russian invasion gone. Now, a dispersed conflict is fought by small, almost autonomous groups, with both sides having adapted to the drone-dominated battlefield that prevents large-scale movement. The Russians use micro-units of infiltrators, 2 or 3 men slipping through rubble, hiding in basements, probing for Ukrainian strongpoints. The defenders operate with speed and precision, detect the enemy, fix them in place by surrounding and suppressing them, neutralizing the trapped soldiers with rifles, grenades, bombs, or drones, and withdraw before Russian drones can kill them in return. The main forces of both sides now remain roughly 10 kilometers outside the town limits, unable to advance through the open fields that have become killing grounds. Inside Pokrovsk, only the smallest, bravest, and most disciplined units can survive. For the Russians, infiltration serves to maintain a symbolic push forward and to create the illusion of control. While for the Ukrainians, the mission is to contain, hunt, and eliminate these infiltrators before they can threaten logistics or weaken defensive cohesion. Despite the terrible nature of this fighting, Ukraine's army does not need to reclaim every block of Pokrovsk. What matters is keeping Russian territorial control south of the railway line, serving as a tactical barrier from the still defended north. This new model of urban warfare rewards skill, awareness, and endurance more than numbers. Yet, for the Russians, whose units are filled with unwilling conscripts and penal soldiers, it has become an unsustainable meat grinder. Their desertions and refusal to fight are the logical outcome of a system that sends men to die for objectives already lost in the chaos of the gray zone. While the Azov units push east of Rodinsky to relieve pressure and reopen Myrnohrad's northern approach, Ukrainian defenders inside Pokrovsk only need to hold long enough to keep that corridor alive. If Myrnohrad's connection stays open, the town can continue to resist, or if necessary, conduct an organized withdrawal under cover of the northern fields. The Ukrainian tactic of cutting off and starving out Russian positions before eliminating them is paying off with the continued capture of village after village. Now, the last Russian stronghold in this sector is about to fall, with hundreds of enemy soldiers being left to either die or surrender. Ukrainian forces in Sumy successfully exploit methodical maneuver warfare, pressing forward settlement by settlement to turn Russian positions into manageable targets. Rather than trading lives in costly frontal fights, Ukrainian commanders isolate enemy detachments, sever their supply lines, and then tighten the noose until those positions become untenable. Relentless air and drone strikes have exposed Russian units, leaving many undersupplied and unrotated for several weeks. By bypassing strongpoints and collapsing salients piece by piece, Ukraine has been able to push north of Kindratovka and even probe back into Kursk, while turning both sides of the border into a flexible battlefield. Another push north from Andriivka led to Oleksiivka being cut off on three sides, and the Russians there facing an increasingly dangerous situation. The encirclement is the result of coordinated Ukrainian maneuver, constant fire control, and persistent pressure, with Ukrainian units now executing flanking attacks to close lateral routes. At the same time, Ukrainian drone units pummel Russian concentrations and roads in the area with hundreds of strikes. This denies the Russians any possibility of moving freely and degrades all reinforcement efforts. With only a single usable road into Oleksiivka, bringing supplies, evacuating casualties, or rotating troops has become effectively impossible, as anyone attempting the approach is detected and struck long before it reaches the outer edge of the settlement. Russian soldiers on the ground now openly warn that Oleksiivka is heading for the same fate as Kindrativka, unless the Russian command abandons the position rather than bury more troops there, as they report that the semi-encirclement is rapidly turning into a slaughter. Instead, Russian officers have reacted with frantic redeployments in a bid to break the encirclement, as the exhausted 382nd Separate Infantry Battalion of the 810th Russian Naval Brigade was pushed into action at Kindrativka. Supposed to mount a counterattack and relieve the pocket at Oleksivka, under normal strength, this formation would field roughly 1,000 soldiers, but under current conditions, it only musters close to 500. Notably, a large number of these are reportedly newly mobilized, poorly trained and badly equipped soldiers, thrown in just to bring the battalion up to a higher combat readiness on paper. Russian sources confirm all combat-effective reserves have been redeployed to Pokrovsk, leaving only second-tier and under-strength units for the task of preventing a full-on collapse. One Russian officer even reported they receive only older people, marginals, and simply not combat-ready recruits in poor physical condition. He added that to prevent desertion or the shooting of officers, they are constantly watched by military police and are only issued weapons right before combat missions, with ammunition limited to 2 magazines each. The attempted rushed countermeasure to attack Kindrativka to relieve pressure at Oleksiyevka was predictable and fated to fail. Replacements arrived under fire, becoming immediate targets for Ukrainian drone and artillery assets, with exhausted Russian units unable to form coherent assault echelons. Rather than rescuing the encircled formations, these hurried moves only dramatically increased Russian casualty counts. The attempt to plug gaps with understrength battalions highlights an operational dilemma, with Russia's concept of trading bodies for ground, running straight into Ukraine's deliberate tactics of isolation, starvation, and attrition. Overall, with the Ukrainians maintaining pressure by holding fire control over the approaches, continuing daily drone strikes, and refusing to be lured into costly frontal battles, Oleksiyevka's fate will mirror earlier Russian collapses in the area. Ukraine's advantage is decisive, with its troops being on the offensive and able to choose when and where to fight. The fall of Oleksiyevka would fracture the western part of Russia's Sumy incursion, damage morale, and the remaining soldiers would either be captured or neutralized. This will jeopardize the nearby eastern salient and lead to repetition of the events, with the same catastrophic outcome for Russia.